Let's see if Kevin is now no longer driving. Kevin in Oregon,
Okay.
pronounce him. I'm assuming you're parked now.
Yes, sir.
How you
I
doing?
believe that. Good. How are you?
I'm all right.
I believe that Christianity is true because there are only two other options, and those options both lead to depravity, as demonstrated by you and your claims about morals, which are demonstrably immoral, as demonstrated by the lived experiences of the people that partake in those immoral actions through their lifestyles. And I can give you examples.
Oh, it said here that you were calling in to say I'm not a better role model than Jesus.
That's right. And and I'll give you examples. For example, do you believe that sex work is morally virtuous?
Morally virtuous? I don't know whether or not it's morally virtuous.
Is it morally good?
I don't know if it's morally good. I don't find it to be morally evil.
Okay. What about you, Promise? Do you think prostitution is moral?
Moral? Yes, I do.
Correct. Yes, you do. So would you be a prostitute,
here's the
and would your
problem,
husband approve of that?
Kevin, here's
First
the
of all,
problem. You asked me if I thought it was morally virtuous, and you asked Promise if she thought it was moral. And the difference here is that I view moral virtue as something that is done as a good, and then there is a morally permissible, like it is not prohibited. So
right.
I have no moral prohibition to sex work on its face. That doesn't mean I consider it a moral virtue. I just don't consider it a moral vice. I don't consider it a moral obligation to not engage in sex work. Now, please, I'm promising to answer your other question.
Here's my problem already right off the bat. Who cares if I tell you that I think all these terrible things are moral and great? Who cares if I think being a serial killer is what I ascribe to be someday? What is your evidence that what you believe is true?
My evidence is that your lifestyle has lived through the lived experiences of the people that partake in the actions that you consider moral leads to depravity. And you can come to Powell Boulevard in Portland, Oregon, take a walk down Powell Boulevard.
What is depravity?
Depravity according to who?
Moral corruption. Look up the definition. You don't know the definition?
According to whose standard?
It's the definition of the word.
Kevin,
would you like to agree on?
Kevin, would you stop? Do you know how to have a conversation at all, Kevin?
You're acting like you don't know the meaning of a word.
Kevin, let me finish my sentence.
Kevin, do you think everyone has the same usage of the word depravity? Yes or no?
No. So we need to figure out what your usage
when
is.
I say yes or no, give me that fucking answer and then shut your mouth. No, everyone doesn't mean the same thing by the word depravity. So if we don't all mean the same thing by the word depravity, what's wrong with us asking you what you mean by depravity?
The problem is I mean the dictionary definition, which is morally corrupt.
Sorry, I asked you a question, which is what's wrong with us asking you what you mean by depravity if everybody doesn't use the word in the same way? By the way, there's more than one fucking dictionary, and they don't all include the same entry for depravity. So either talk with us and explain what you mean and have an honest conversation, or fuck off.
Yes, by depravity, I mean morally corrupt.
What does morally corrupt mean? How are you determining? What is your criteria to determine that something is morally corrupt?
That's what I'm getting to. You can go, even in Austin there, you guys have a huge homeless problem.
Okay, I'm going to put you on mute. How you doing,
Totally
Promise?
not answering the question. I'm okay. How are you?
I'm frustrated because Kevin likes to call when he's driving. Kevin likes to pretend that everybody has the same understanding of moral depravity when clearly we're in disagreement about this. Kevin doesn't like to answer actual questions and have a conversation. Like if I said, Promise, are there things that you think are depraved?
Sure.
Me too. we might agree on some of them, but if I said, give me an example and tell me why you think it's depraved. I don't know that. First of all, he went to Austin and homeless as if we're all in Austin. Kevin is exposing himself as once again trying to make it all about me. And he called
Right.
in to say that I'm not morally superior to Jesus. Now, I don't know what Jesus ever said or did. All I know is what people have reported about what Jesus supposedly ever said or did. But I can say that of the things that Jesus supposedly did, there are many that I have not done, and that makes me morally superior to Jesus. I've never told someone to steal for me. I've never destroyed public property. I've never cursed or killed a fig tree for not bearing fruit. I've never killed a whole group of pigs who were minding their own business. And if Jesus is the same as the God of the Old Testament, I've never flooded the entire earth. I've never cursed people into slavery. I've never advocated for slavery. I've never instructed people to slaughter other groups of people and take their shit. I've never turned someone into a pillar of salt. I've never allowed my henchmen to systematically destroy someone's life just to prove that they love me. I'm here interacting, telling people what I think and trying to engage in conversation. If somebody said, hey, what do you think about, is this moral or not? We can then have a discussion about it. I'm not aware that Jesus has ever said or done anything, but I also don't play hide and seek, refusing to address the concerns of my worshipers, and I don't seek worshipers. I find the very notion of worship to be depraved. The concept of requiring worship is depravity itself. And when somebody publicly misrepresents me and I find out about it, I do my best to correct them. When I see someone hurting, I will intervene. When I see someone hurting someone else, I will intervene. Jesus doesn't intervene. Jesus, we have no reason to think exists, and maybe no reason to think ever existed. But if he does exist, he is sitting there watching people be abused, sexually assaulted, beaten, starving, and doesn't do a thing about it, except I might punish them maybe later someday. If you're going to suggest that I am not a better moral role model than Jesus, you have to start by demonstrating how all of those things are more moral than I am. But nothing about Austin or homeless people is in any way a concern. And Kevin clearly has a bug up his ass about prostitution and sex work. So, Kevin, what is the criteria that you use to determine that prostitution is immoral? That's the only question I have.
It was a beep, but I'm assuming you asked what is the criteria I use to determine prostitution is immoral?
Yes.
Okay. The criteria I used is literally asking prostitutes about their lived experience and how they feel about it, because morals are written on our heart, as God states in the Bible.
So your real justification is that you believe God writes morals on people's hearts, and you've talked to prostitutes. Well, I've talked to prostitutes as well. Do all prostitutes agree on whether or not prostitution is moral? Yes or no?
Deep down, yes, all of them do. It's immoral.
You're a liar,
down.
Kevin. You are a
So you're
liar
just
and you are
lying.
dishonest. We
No,
don't
I'm
have
not.
to keep. Yes, you are.
Then why won't Eve be a prostitute? Why won't Promise be a prostitute?
I'm sorry.
First of all, what I do or don't do has nothing to do with this conversation. Second of all,
But you
if I
won't do it
wanted
because
to,
you
I
know
would
it's
do so.
wrong.
I'm also not a jazz pianist. It's not because I think it's wrong at all. I have all sorts of reasons, none of which I'll be sharing with you. You've been a condescending asshole this entire conversation. I'd really like it if you'd answer Matt's questions instead of deflecting over to me. That's really a cheap shot when he's asked you some basic things that you won't answer.
Okay. Is fentanyl good? Is smoking fentanyl good?
I have had fentanyl before because I was recovering from surgery. I was in extreme pain and they gave me fentanyl. It was a great thing. It was the only thing that stopped my pain.
Right. So can you convince the people on Powell Boulevard in Portland, Oregon, in tents right now begging for propane?
Do you want to answer Matt's questions or not?
Good?
How did you
Is that
determine?
moral?
How did you
What's the
determine that
question?
God writes? How did you determine that God writes morals on someone's heart? Can you answer that question or not?
The same method you use to determine that you're a conscious being.
No, Kevin. You've now wasted too much of our time because you don't know how to have a conversation. You went to prostitution, and then when we countered that by suggesting that not everybody agrees about prostitution, including prostitutes, you ignored that and went on to why does Promise not do it? Maybe she has. How would you know? But also, then you went on to
But
fentanyl.
she was stopped because she knows it's
Shut your
immoral.
fucking mouth until I'm done talking. Do you understand?
Yes.
Do you understand?
Yes.
Good. Then you jumped to fentanyl. Now, fentanyl is a drug. Its use isn't necessarily a moral issue at all. There are circumstances under which fentanyl use is the best possible thing for some individuals, and there are circumstances under which fentanyl use is a terrible problem because of addiction, but that is independent of the moral valuation of it. Just like driving fast and exceeding the speed limit may be the most moral thing you can do under circumstance A, but the worst thing you can do under circumstance B. If A is with a police escort heading to a hospital to save somebody's life, and B is there's a whole bunch of children around, you are ignoring the fact that ethics and morals are almost entirely situational, and you are grossly oversimplifying. You have oversimplified fentanyl and prostitution, all because these are things that you're worried about and opposed to, while you have zero way to demonstrate that your view about morality is in fact the correct one. Your turn.
That's why I said up front, there's only three options. Christianity is true, I'm not convinced, or Christianity is not true. The I'm not convinced and the Christianity is not true both lead to, if you live that lifestyle and you actually follow through with that, it's okay to do drugs. It's okay to be
It
a
is
prostitute.
okay to do drugs.
Okay
It
to
is
watch
okay,
porn.
Kevin.
And if
Kevin,
you
it's
live
okay
that
to do drugs.
lifestyle, you follow that path, it leads to depravity. That's the whole point.
No, it doesn't. And I no longer care about your opinion, Kevin. Goodbye.
The dishonesty is like, very frustrating.
He's like, there's only three options. Either Christianity's true, Christianity's not true, or I don't know. No. Those aren't the options. Either Christianity's true or Christianity's not true. What you're talking about is what people believe about Christianity, Kevin, but you're too dense to realize that. Either you believe that Christianity is true, you do not believe that Christianity is true, or you have remained uncommitted, or actually, in reality, you are either convinced that Christianity is true or you're not. But you could be convinced Christianity is true, convinced Christianity is false, or not convinced of either of those. So you have to be careful when you go from X to not X, and then belief about X, because you believe X, do not believe X, and then believe X is false. Those are the three.
Right.
But you just assert that if you don't accept that Christianity is true, you will then fall into depravity. But your argument is circular. Because what you're saying is, if you do not believe that Christianity is true, you will not hold the same moral views that I hold because of Christianity, which by definition makes you depraved. And so while somebody could do drugs and never having a problem, somebody could do drugs and never have a problem from it, therefore engaging in nothing that is moral depravity, even under your view of Christianity. But you just skip past all that. And you're like, there's junkies on the street. Okay. You know what? I don't think that their addiction makes them immoral. I think that their substance abuse problem means that they need help. And I think that while you didn't defend your notion that I am a morally inferior role model from Jesus, Jesus hung out with prostitutes. Jesus, I would hope, would either look at someone with a substance abuse problem and say, that individual is in need of our help, or Jesus would pronounce them immoral. If Jesus agrees with you and pronounces that person immoral, then once again, I am morally superior to Jesus. I'm morally superior to you, Kevin, all day long, because I don't sit around smugly thinking that hookers and junkies are just immoral and weak.
Well, and that's my problem. He tried, that entire conversation was just trying to point things back on us and make it some personal situation. But I don't have any friends that are sex workers that would ever try to be so condescending, so rude, try to imply that they can read my mind, accuse me of lying. When I just said, I don't believe that prostitution is inherently immoral. And then you go on to say, you don't do it because you think it's immoral. You don't do it. Don't try to thought police. Like, that's so infuriating and so dishonest. And whatever lifestyle it is that, what was his name? Kevin is practicing is one that I would like to stay so far away from, because to me, there was so much more moral depravity I just experienced in that phone call than with any of my friends that are sex workers.
I have friends and friendly acquaintances and former partners who have been sex workers. I have had sex workers as guests on my show. I have a friendly acquaintance who was a porn star in the 80s and remains a sex worker today. The notion that all sex workers, they know down deep inside that it's immoral, is really just you, Kevin, taking your personal baggage and projecting it onto everybody else. You have become convinced that X is immoral and leads to terrible lives because somebody did the sharpshooter fallacy and said, look, here's someone with a terrible life and they were a prostitute. Here's someone with a terrible life and they were a drug dealer. The only explanation for that is that it's immoral. Well, morality may not be a function of whether or not you have a troubling and difficult life. Morality might not be the reason you end up homeless. And when you paint with a broad brush to make it look as if everybody homeless, everybody in prison for anything, everybody who's having difficulty is just engaged in morality, you don't even have a kindergarten level of moral accountability, moral foundation, and moral responsibility. Instead, you're the little child whose mind was polluted by religion. And then you were steeped in it and surrounded by it to the point where you can no longer think for yourself. And that's why you can't answer the questions that we ask. That's why you refuse to actually address the exceptions to your tiny little narrow prescriptivist mind.
Well, and when he's pointing out, I've talked to prostitutes and they said that it was bad for them. He doesn't even have the foundation to say why that was. Why is it bad that it wasn't good for them? You and I do, based off of our moral guideline. We can point to well-being and say, yeah, if somebody says it was harmful for their well-being, then they shouldn't do that thing. He could not give us an answer as to why that's a problem for somebody to participate in something that they don't want to. And he was deflecting from that answer the entire conversation by pointing fingers at us over and over and over again. Also, it sounds to me that he has some kind of thing going on with prostitution where he's wanting to talk about it so much that that's all he could talk about, instead of telling us who this God is that's created these morals that he can't tell us how he got to them, other than they're written on a heart. Literally, physically written on a heart? Explain. But he didn't.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for watching that clip. Did you know we saw what you were doing when you watched it?
You saw all of it. All of it. All of it.
All of it. So you're going to want to pay us hush money over at patreon.com/calltheline, where you can buy our silence and watch our patron exclusive podcast.